Joining me now from Odessa, Ukraine is Michael Bosser-Q, Global Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He is also the former spokesperson for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Michael, always a pleasure to see you. As I just said, I mean, these talks today follow the talks yesterday between U.S. and Ukraine. What are your expectations here? What are you watching?
Good to be with you. Well, these talks are taking place in the desert in the Middle East, and if there's anything we have learned from modern history, very little comes from U.S. forays into the quicksands of the Middle East. The Trump administration has been in power only a few weeks. Gaza is a mess, and Ukraine-Russia peace talks are in a mess, if you ask me. Now, the Ukrainians who emerged from talks last night came out with a very measured assessment of what happened, technical talks, they called it, and the Russians will go on today. But it's becoming clearer and clearer that the Russians are kind of on a two-track approach to these talks. One is to restore U.S.-Russia bilateral relations, which have really suffered since the full-scale invasion, and that could include things, for example, of getting Boeing spare parts for their aircraft going again. It could open up space for U.S. airlines to fly over Siberia, things like that. And then there's the separate track of a peace deal with Ukraine. But I would venture to say that it's the first track, bilateral relations, that they're really going to put a lot of effort to and see what happens with Ukraine.
And on that second track, I mean, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has said that the goal of these meetings is a 30-day full ceasefire that would pave the way for talks on a more permanent end. Does that sound realistic to you at all?
No, not at all, and for a number of reasons. I mean, number one, they're pounding away at Ukraine, as they mentioned, and as you mentioned, and then secondly, they're putting very difficult things on the table right now that no Ukrainian president could agree to. That is, for example, Russian control of the four oblasts, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk. The latter two, they only control partially. And of course, legal recognition of Crimea. And then the other odd thing I noticed, because I live only a few blocks from the World Port Odessa here, is the Russians want to restore the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Why? So that they can start shipping grain, a lot of it stolen from Ukraine, from places like Mariupol, which they occupy, to other world ports, to Turkey. I just had a look before we came on air at the live marine traffic, and there are dozens and dozens of Russian ships shipping everything from oil to wheat from Russian ports to Turkey, whereas from the Ukrainian side, there's very little. And one more factor here is that the Ukrainians have disabled about 1/3 of Russia's Black Sea fleet. So of course, the Russians want access to those Ukrainian ports they occupy so they can start shipping from there too without fear of fire from the Ukrainian side.
Yeah, so perhaps the economics of the war are playing an outsized role here. Michael, I want to play for you a clip. This was Trump speaking over the weekend with Outkick.com. This is a platform that's owned by Fox. They talk a lot about sports and American culture. Take a listen to what he said.
I don't think there's anybody in the world that could have stopped him except me, and I hope I'm going to be able to stop him. That's a very rational discussions. And I just want to see the people stop getting killed. You know, they're losing 2,500 young kids a week. Yeah. And they're Russian, and they're Ukrainian.
So he thinks he's going to be able to stop him. I mean, you've been in Ukraine, Michael, since the start of this war. Do you think that Ukrainians believe that Trump can get through to Putin, and at what cost?
No, they don't. And I would venture to say that the Ukrainians are seeing the Trump administration as less and less a credible player in these negotiations. For example, where is the Trump promise of arming Ukraine to the teeth if the Russians don't give concessions? I think that there's a growing feeling that the Saudis would be a much more reliable, trustworthy interlocutor than the American side, who, again, feel very, very happy to give as many concessions as possible to the Russians. And it looks, again, like more and more so that they can restore bilateral relations on track. And then that Ukrainian peace deal is a secondary thing. Mr. Trump is very, very eager for some kind of foreign affairs win. As I mentioned, his efforts in Gaza have gone the opposite way. Same here in Ukraine. So there's a feeling here again that he may give away too much to the Russians just to have a quick win.
You know, Michael, it's interesting as we talk and sort of try to understand what Russia wants from this. We've talked about the goal from the U.S. side of this. What would success look like from these talks for Ukraine? I mean, it sounds like, and all of our reporting has suggested that the two sides remain pretty far apart on the big issues.
Yeah, I mean, if you read, for example, CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh's analysis, it looks very, very far apart, and I agree with him. What would it mean for the Ukrainians is an immediate laying down of the guns, because that's what Ukraine needs badly right now. The economy here, including in an economically resilient place such as Odessa, is on its knees right now. The other thing that needs to happen, that this could happen very easily, is for the Trump administration to ease off on the threat to lift the asylum protection for 200,000 or so Ukrainians currently in the United States. It's very, very difficult for them to come back here under these current conditions. And of course, Ukraine needs full access to sea lanes, to roads and railways as well to ship their stuff out. But the main thing right now is that peace needs to happen, because the longer this goes on, of course, the more chances there are of those millions of Ukrainians who went overseas not coming back, and for the economy to fall even further. And right now, for example, the Ukrainian state has a $3.5 billion monthly hole in its budget, hence difficult to pay pensions and teachers' salaries, things like that.
Yeah, bringing it back to the economics of it all. Michael Bosterque, we'll leave it here. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.